caros estudantes, investigadores, técnicos e funcionários do ICS, caros dirigentes e investigadores de outras escolas, outras unidades de investigação, associações profissionais aqui presentes, excelentíssimas senhoras vice-reitoras, não sei, não, está o António em representação da reitoria do ISCTE. Dear Sue, would you like to come and take your place at the table? Oh, okay, you can stay there for the moment if you prefer. Dear Sue, on behalf of ICS, I would like to welcome you to the formal opening of the academic year, to thank you warmly for accepting our invitation to come to Lisbon, and also for accepting the challenge to help us to think about this crucial issue of how what is happening to research evaluation and assessment in Europe today. Excelentíssimo Sr. Vice-Reitor da Universidade de Lisboa, professor António Feijó, é uma honra e um prazer tê-lo connosco na abertura do ano letivo do ICS, num dia e num momento que é muito especial para o ICS. É um dia em que acolhemos e damos as boas-vindas aos novos estudantes, mas como também é um dia em que juntamos toda a comunidade ICS, para ouvir a palestra Sedas Nunes, para pensar e debater um assunto relevante do ponto de vista da nossa agenda científica ou, de forma mais geral, da organização do sistema científico. Queria, por isso, fazer duas breves notas. Em primeiro lugar, dirijo-me aos estudantes para lhes dar as boas-vindas aos estudos de pós-graduação do ICS e desejar-lhes muitas felicidades para o doutoramento e o trabalho de investigação que vão realizar. Fazer um doutoramento, como eu digo no guia do estudante, é um desafio. Implica adquirir e pôr em prática competências teóricas e metodológicas, com criatividade e rigor. Implica compreender os processos e os meandros da pesquisa empírica, tratar e interpretar dados, treinar a escrita e a capacidade de comunicação, saber combinar autonomia individual e trabalho em equipa. Ao mesmo tempo, é um empreendimento individual e solitário, mas também o seu oposto, pois só num coletivo e com responsabilidade perante a sociedade é que podemos produzir e disseminar conhecimento. Por tudo isto, fazer um doutoramento é, de facto, um desafio exigente, mas também um período único. São 4 anos de aprendizagem em que o estudante tem tempo, autonomia e enquadramento, não só para aprender a fazer ciência, mas também para perceber os valores da ciência e o que é ser cientista. A minha mensagem para todos os estudantes é, por isso, a seguinte: apostar num doutoramento é apostar na ciência e investir na ciência é investir no futuro. Ciência é conhecimento organizado e comprovado, sistematizado e questionável, aberto à crítica e ao progresso assente em saber cumulativo. Ciência é procura e produção de conhecimento, com responsabilidade pelos seus métodos e resultados, com responsabilidade perante a sociedade, por tudo o que alcança, mas também com humildade e verdade por tudo o que ignora ou falha. Ciência é também valores. Os valores da busca da verdade, da crítica salutar e estimulante, da construção coletiva de equipas e de instituições dedicadas. Mas também os valores de civilização, a que as ciências sociais prestam homenagem e incorporam: a cultura humanista, a liberdade, a igualdade. A segunda e última nota tem a ver com o tema da nossa conferência de hoje. Para onde vai a avaliação da ciência na Europa? Do que falamos quando falamos de excelência? É um termo ambíguo. Ao contrário do que poderão pensar os novos estudantes, que é uma temática pouco interessante do ponto de vista do doutoramento que vão realizar, creio que compreenderão rapidamente que se trata de uma questão muito importante, justamente por aquilo que acabei de dizer. Se a ciência é espírito crítico, cultura de transparência e de verdade, cultura de responsabilidade, então a forma como são avaliados e como somos avaliados tem de ser competente, responsável, transparente. Tem de reconhecer a iniciativa e o mérito. Tem de assegurar a independência e o mérito dos avaliadores e dos orientadores. Tem de reconhecer a diversidade das áreas disciplinares e das formas de fazer ciência. Tem de promover e salvaguardar os princípios da integridade e ética científicas. Não se compadece com indicadores únicos, uniformizadores, ou com abordagens que dividem as ciências e os investigadores. Não se compadece com a secundarização ou mesmo desvalorização de umas disciplinas, abordagens ou metodologias face a outras, como acontece, por exemplo, com os que apostam também na língua portuguesa como veículo de cultura, de conhecimento e de internacionalização. A minha mensagem é que fazer um doutoramento será também um momento de confronto com diferentes culturas de avaliação, diferentes critérios e desafios que vos serão colocados pelos orientadores e pelas instituições. Portanto, sejam críticos e autónomos, cultivem a responsabilidade, a transparência e a partilha de saberes e de perspectivas, procurem orientadores e equipas que devolvam a confiança e a iniciativa. Caros estudantes, espero que encontrem neste Instituto um ambiente de trabalho estimulante e acolhedor, que vos permita aprender, investigar, partilhar saberes e criar novas redes de conhecimento na área das ciências sociais. Bem-vindos e bem-vindas à ciência e à comunidade ICS. Esperamos todos juntos, investigadores que ensinam e orientam, técnicos e funcionários que prestam apoio, contribuir para que seja um sucesso o percurso de doutoramento que vocês estão agora a iniciar. Muito obrigada.
Então, primeiro gostaria de cumprimentar todos os presentes e agradecer o convite formulado pela diretora do ICS, Karin Wall, pelo presidente do Conselho Pedagógico, João Vasconcelos, em nome dos representantes dos estudantes para o Conselho Pedagógico, para dizermos algumas palavras na abertura do ano académico. Como somos estudantes e investigadores, haverá períodos que algum de nós terá menos disponibilidade, por isso podia estar hoje eu aqui, a Joana Rebelo Moraes ou o Rodrigo Domenech, os outros representantes no Conselho Pedagógico dos Estudantes. Gostaríamos de agradecer o trabalho dos colegas que nos antecederam, Ricardo Moreira, Filipa Madeira e Amanda Guerreiro, pelo excelente trabalho realizado no mandato anterior. Temos sentido da parte dos estudantes que existe uma cultura de não participação e desinteresse da maioria dos estudantes pelos órgãos de gestão do ICS e gostaríamos de alterar isso. Para começar, teremos reuniões mensais à hora de almoço, cuja data será anunciada no mês anterior, que servirão como horário de atendimento em que estudantes poderão colocar questões relacionadas com a avaliação, orientação, pedagogia e diferentes tipos de apoio disponíveis aos estudantes e investigadores. Poderão também fazer sugestões para fazermos propostas nas reuniões do Conselho Pedagógico. O próximo almoço-reunião já está marcado e os estudantes presentes estão desde já convidados. Será dia 15 de novembro, quinta-feira, às 12h30, numa das salas do Reis de Chão, a anunciar. Estaremos disponíveis para realizar reuniões com os estudantes individualmente ou com os estudantes de cada doutoramento, sempre que seja necessário. Os nossos contactos estão no organigrama que consta no site do ICS, é só enviarem-nos um mail aos três que responderemos o mais rápido possível. Os três objetivos fundamentais da equipa eleita para integrar o Conselho Pedagógico são melhorar a informação e comunicação entre os estudantes e os seus representantes durante todo o mandato, contribuir para encontrar soluções para a melhoria de condições de trabalho dos doutorandos no ICS, aumentar espaços de participação e auscultação dos colegas. O Open Day é um bom exemplo de uma boa prática de inclusão dos estudantes, promovendo a divulgação dos seus trabalhos em curso, mas julgamos que ao longo do ano poderá haver mais formação específica para quem sentir essa necessidade sobre, por exemplo, como realizar as múltiplas tarefas do investigador. Por exemplo, como fazer uma boa apresentação, como escrever, estruturar e submeter um artigo, para que revistas, como rever um artigo. Poderia haver uma parceria com a Faculdade de Letras para os estudantes poderem melhorar o nível de uma língua que queiram aperfeiçoar, para poderem participar em congressos internacionais mais à vontade. O Responsible Research and Innovation tem sido uma iniciativa muito interessante, em que os estudantes têm muito a ganhar em participar de forma ativa, pois num ambiente informal vão-se partilhando angústias metodológicas e éticas entre investigadores mais e menos experientes. Em relação à avaliação, agora mais a título pessoal, estou muito curioso com a intervenção da Presidente da European Sociological Association, Sue Scott. Os métodos de avaliação mais quantitativos, focados quase exclusivamente nas publicações nas revistas indexadas, parece, a meu ver, que nos têm afastado das pessoas e da sociedade. Os resultados das nossas investigações devem ser apresentados nas comunidades que estudamos e para isso é preciso tempo e reconhecimento científico para quem tenta devolver e comunicar os resultados de outras formas e junto de públicos mais alargados. A investigação em ciências sociais e humanas devia ser mais valorizada na Universidade de Lisboa e na sociedade portuguesa. Há estudos cujos frutos dos seus resultados só surgem muitos anos mais tarde. Para compreender uma sociedade cada vez mais complexa, como temos observado nos últimos tempos, é necessário estudar os processos sociais de forma aprofundada num tempo longo. É preciso contextualizá-los e para isso é preciso tempo e estabilidade. Tem faltado estabilidade e sobrado precariedade e incerteza na investigação, levando centenas de investigadores a emigrar ou a mudar de carreira. Sei que há preocupação e sensibilidade da direção do ICS relativamente a estas questões e esperamos que a realidade mude e que possamos alargar o horizonte de expectativa que nos permita olhar o presente e o futuro de outra forma. O trabalho realizado nos grupos de investigação do ICS e nos observatórios, pelos investigadores e pelos estudantes e investigadores, continuará a ter um papel incontornável na divulgação e estudo das grandes questões que importam à sociedade portuguesa, europeia e mundial, a partir de diferentes perspectivas, disciplinas, reforçando a grande importância das ciências sociais em tempos de rápidas mudanças e incertezas. No Conselho Pedagógico, que contará também com uma nova equipa, liderada por João Vasconcelos, tentaremos dar o nosso melhor e contribuir para resolver algumas das questões elencadas e outras que possam surgir ao longo do mandato. Para terminar, gostaria de dar as boas-vindas aos novos estudantes. Muito obrigado.
Dou a palavra ao João Vasconcelos, Presidente dos Estudos Pós-Graduados.
Obrigado, Karen. Bom, Sr. Vice-Reitor António Feijó, Sra. Diretora do ICS, Karen Wall, Dear Professor Sue Scott, cara Presidente do Conselho Científico, Ana Nunes de Almeida, caro João Bahia, ilustres convidados, estudantes e colegas. É um prazer estar aqui a dar as boas-vindas aos novos doutorandos do ICS. É aos novos doutorandos que me vou dirigir, embora também o faça aos mais velhos que já cá estão. Acolhemos este ano 40 novos estudantes. Desejamos a todos que se sintam em casa e esperamos proporcionar as melhores condições para a vossa formação e para a realização das vossas teses. Estamos aqui para isso. O ICS é uma escola da Universidade de Lisboa, para os novos, onde a investigação e a formação avançada se fazem com articulação estreita. Somos herdeiros de uma instituição pioneira no desenvolvimento das ciências sociais em Portugal, o Gabinete de Investigações Sociais, criado em 1962 por Académico Sedas Nunes e integrado em 1981 na Universidade de Lisboa, usando desde então a sua designação atual. A multidisciplinaridade, a liberdade intelectual e o rigor científico são marcas do ICS desde os tempos do GIS, que muito prezamos e continuamos a cultivar. A qualidade e a internacionalização da investigação que produzimos e dos nossos estudos pós-graduados são regularmente monitorizadas por painéis de avaliação internacionais desde 1996. Em todas as avaliações, o Instituto tem merecido classificação excelente, a mais elevada. Neste ano letivo, participamos, em parceria com outras escolas da Universidade de Lisboa, em associação interuniversitária ou em exclusivo, na oferta de 10 programas doutorais. Oferecemos doutoramentos disciplinares em Antropologia, em História, em Política Comparada, em Psicologia Social, em Sociologia, e participamos também na oferta de doutoramentos em áreas de estudo interdisciplinares, focados em alguns dos desafios mais prementes do mundo contemporâneo. Alterações climáticas e políticas de desenvolvimento sustentável, ciências de sustentabilidade, um novo doutoramento, um programa doutoral que está agora a arrancar, estudos de desenvolvimento, filosofia da ciência, tecnologia, arte e sociedade e migrações. Colaboramos também no doutoramento em enfermagem, oferecido pela Universidade de Lisboa, em colaboração com a Escola Superior de Enfermagem de Lisboa. Participamos ainda na oferta de 2 mestrados, o mestrado em Estudos Brasileiros e o mestrado em Cultura Científica e Divulgação das Ciências. O ICS promove ao longo do ano várias escolas de verão e de inverno, cursos avançados de curta duração, e colabora também na formação universitária para séniores da Universidade de Lisboa. O ICS é uma casa que acolhe neste momento 105 investigadores doutorados, 29 profissionais técnicos e administrativos e 162 estudantes de doutoramento de diversas nacionalidades. Cultivamos um ambiente de entreajuda e de exigência mútua. 2 práticas cujo equilíbrio é fundamental para vos proporcionarmos uma formação doutoral de sucesso. Os doutorandos do ICS desenvolvem a sua formação com orientação personalizada desde o primeiro momento e em contexto de investigação, como disse. Convidamos a todos, aos novos doutorandos e aos antigos, a participarem nas atividades dos 7 grupos de investigação temáticos em que nos organizamos. Os grupos de investigação, o GI do ICS, são grupos de debate científico e de troca de experiências e resultados de pesquisa que promovem a integração dos estudantes nesta nossa comunidade de investigação. Desejamos também que tirem proveito dos seminários e das conferências que pautam o dia-a-dia do Instituto, da dinâmica dos projetos de investigação em curso e das redes científicas internacionais de que fazemos parte. O nosso Gabinete de Estudos Pós-Graduados está ao vosso dispor para vos ajudar em todos os assuntos administrativos. Contem sempre, por isso, com a Maria Goretti Matias, com a Cláudia Andrade, com a Sónia Arroz e, isto é um privilégio para os doutorandos em alterações climáticas, porque são o contingente mais numeroso, têm em exclusivo, os doutorandos em alterações climáticas podem dispor em exclusivo do secretariado da Raquel Brito. É um bónus por serem os mais numerosos. Os estudantes do ICS participam em 2, o João acabou de referir isso, em 2 dos 4 órgãos de governo do Instituto, o Conselho de Escola e o Conselho Pedagógico. Aos representantes dos estudantes nestes órgãos, a Rita Cantu e a Sofia Serra da Silva, no Conselho de Escola, e o João, a Joana Rebelo Moraes e o Rodrigo Domenech, no Pedagógico. Desejo bom trabalho, que convosco será conjunto, e neste mandato de 2 anos que estão agora a iniciar. Aos restantes estudantes, só posso repetir o apelo que o João vos fez. Que partilhem as vossas dúvidas, críticas e sugestões acerca da vossa vida no Instituto com os representantes no Conselho de Escola e no Conselho Pedagógico, que estão nestes órgãos justamente para vos ouvir e representar. E saúdo a excelente iniciativa dos almoços mensais que o João acabou de iniciar. No que diz respeito a aspectos relacionados com cada curso, com cada doutoramento em particular, digamos assim, as questões de ordem pedagógica, científica, deverão ser levadas primeiro às respectivas comissões científicas e portanto, e aos representantes dos doutoramentos, do ICS nas comissões científicas dos doutoramentos, cujos nomes e fotografias encontram no guia do estudante que está disponibilizado aqui. Bom, dirigi-me aos novos doutorandos e agora, para terminar, quero-me dirigir aos 22 antigos estudantes que se doutoraram connosco e que defenderam as suas teses no ano letivo que acabou agora. E dirijo-me a eles para desejar a todos sucessos, boa sorte na vossa vida profissional e pessoal. Temos saudades vossas. Se puderem, continuem a visitar-nos. Obrigado.
Dou agora a palavra ao professor
Senhora Diretora do Instituto de Ciências Sociais, Senhor Presidente do Conselho Pedagógico, Senhora Presidente do Conselho Científico, João Bahia, representante dos doutorandos, caros colegas, caros estudantes, caros colaboradores técnicos e administrativos, eu trago apenas uma breve palavra de boas-vindas aos novos estudantes, por parte do Reitor da Universidade de Lisboa. O professor Cruz Serra gostava de estar presente, infelizmente não pode estar presente. Tentará vir ainda à parte final desta cerimónia, mas ele pediu-me que desendereçasse essa palavra, uma palavra de boas-vindas. Habitualmente, o que nós falamos em Portugal, muitas vezes, das instituições pretendem ser aquilo que se usa, o termo é usado em inglês, uma research university. Querendo com isso dizer um certo tipo de universidade em que as pós-graduações são decisivas e a investigação a nível da pós-graduação é decisiva. E de certo que, nesse contexto, uma universidade, uma Research University em Lisboa, tem o ICS como uma escola privilegiada. E tem-no porque o ICS centra-se exclusivamente sobre isso, sobre a investigação ao mais alto nível. Os números que foram dados são impressionantes, 161 doutorandos neste momento, 22 o ano passado que concluíram os seus doutoramentos, e isto é raro em Portugal. Há modos de tentar criar uma Research University, mas habitualmente nas instituições com a dimensão das portuguesas isto é um propósito relativamente pio, é difícil consegui-lo. A Universidade de Lisboa tem, no entanto, a densidade para o fazer. Um exemplo do que pode ser a dimensão da Universidade de Lisboa a esse nível encontra-se numa das primeiras publicações da recém-criada imprensa da Universidade de Lisboa, que foi justamente este guia de metodologias de avaliação de políticas públicas, organizado pelo João Ferrão, do ICS, e pelo José Manuel Pinto Paixão, da Faculdade de Ciências, que congregou na feitura do volume 45, e também está aqui mais uma pessoa presente, o ISCS, 45 investigadores e professores da Universidade de Lisboa. E isso é um bom exemplo do que a estrita densidade de nomes e de atividades e de investigação pode fazer. Eu gostaria de acabar só com uma pequena palavra aos doutorandos. Eu lembro-me quando estava a fazer o meu doutoramento, fora daqui, alguém disse que o doutoramento é um tempo com stress tal que por vezes cria ou eczema nas pessoas ou pode até levar ao divórcio. E se isso é verdade, não deixa também de ser verdade que a experiência desses 4 a 5 anos é vista por aqueles que por essa experiência passaram como talvez o melhor tempo da sua vida ou, de certo, um dos melhores tempos da sua vida. E a razão é simples, porque o clamor utilitarista em relação àquilo que se faz nas universidades esquece uma coisa que é central e que o que caracteriza as disciplinas é uma forma de contentamento intelectual. E isto é a melhor coisa que uma universidade pode fazer. Muito obrigado.
Muito obrigada, Sr. Vice-Reitor. Obrigada também a todos. Vou dar a palavra ao João Vasconcelos também. Vamos ter a apresentação de um vídeo que foi feito com a participação de estudantes e é um vídeo pequeno, vamos no instante passar esse vídeo.
Ok, bom, agora venho aqui só para fazer o papel de apresentador. Pronto, e queria, portanto, aquilo que vamos ver é um curto vídeo da apresentação da Escola Doutoral do ICS, que acabou de ser produzido, saiu agora mesmo das máquinas. Cabe-me só agradecer aqui em nome do Instituto à realizadora, a Mariana Simões, à equipa da Short Fuse, em especial ao Fábio Francisco, à colega Marta Rosales, que deu início a este projeto e que o acompanhou até ao fim, também à colega Inês Ponte e ao João Pedro Silva, dos Serviços de Comunicação e Imagem, que colaboraram também em toda a feitura do vídeo. A fase de pós-produção deste trabalho foi coordenada pela colega Patrícia Vicente, com a colaboração indispensável da Patrícia Pires, também da Comunicação e Imagem, e da Maria Gorati Matias, coordenadora do Gabinete de Estudos Pós-Graduados. Pronto, a todas e todos, muito obrigado. O vídeo tem 3 minutos.
O ICS vem se posicionando cada vez com maior relevância nos rankings internacionais, tanto na docência quanto a qualidade e rigorosidade na investigação, e como instituição de ciências sociais, o ICS é uma casa que convida investigadores de diferentes lugares do mundo e considerei um espaço de excelência para o desenvolvimento da minha pesquisa.
The atmosphere of ICS is intellectually stimulating. The social environment is very enabling. And also it is a program that is very flexible in terms of allowing students to choose their own topics and make their own research.
O facto do ICS, ao nível do espaço, ser uma instituição que acolhe pessoas de áreas tão diferentes, faz com que estejamos à distância do gabinete uns dos outros, em que podemos ir trocando impressões e vendo outras perspectivas sobre os mais diversos temas.
Fazer parte de uma instituição que incentiva trocas interdisciplinares é muito interessante, justamente porque é uma forma de não me manter isolada na minha área de conhecimento.
Um dos pontos fortes do ICS, eu penso que é a sua grande capacidade que tem para realizar eventos científicos, quer a nível de quantidade, quer a nível de qualidade. Estou neste momento inserido em 2 grupos de leitura, o que é muito bom porque me ajuda a ultrapassar os desafios que tenho vindo a enfrentar no doutoramento.
There are many extracurricular activities at ICS that you can actually get out of the normal rhythm of work and actually mingle with other researchers and actually express your concerns maybe, but also meet them and know about the research as well.
O que nós queremos é incutir-lhes esta curiosidade pelo diferente. Queremos que sejam autónomos nas suas decisões, que sejam capazes de nos desafiar com problemas e questões novos, que nos saibam fazer perguntas ousadas, diferentes e difíceis.
O ICS é a comunidade, é a acessibilidade e a investigação.
Inovação, integração e qualidade.
Conhecimento, rigor e inovação.
Exatamente, aproveitando este dia grande e então sentem-se, que é para eu dar-vos a boa notícia sentados. Boa tarde a todos. Como eu estava a dizer, aproveitando este dia grande e este dia feliz do ICS e em nome do Conselho Científico, gostava de vos dar a boa nova. A nossa obra coletiva Changing Societies, Legacies and Challenges está lançada e online. Já está no nosso site, podem consultá-la. 49 capítulos, com os seus 3 volumes, organizados em torno dos 3 pilares, Inclusion, Citizenship and Sustainability. Primeiro volume, Inclusions, Inside Out, Outside In. Segundo volume, Citizenship in Crisis, e terceiro volume, The Diverse Worlds of Sustainability. Parabéns a todos e boas leituras.
Muito obrigada. Vou dar a palavra à Sofia Abuim, que vai apresentar a professora Sue Scott.
Muito obrigada, Karin, diretora do Instituto de Ciências Sociais. Eu vou começar por falar em português e cumprimentar, aqui nesta posição que tenho hoje, toda a comunidade do ICS, os estudantes, em primeiro lugar. No fundo, a conversa que estamos a ter hoje e que iremos ter hoje com a apresentação da nossa convidada é também para o futuro e não só para, digamos, para o passado ou para o presente. E também gostaria de cumprimentar, como é evidente, todas as entidades presentes, o vice-reitor, o professor Jorge Val, o professor José Luís Cardoso, a presidente do Conselho Científico, toda a Karin Wall, que me sugeriu que fosse eu, talvez por afinidades eletivas temáticas, a fazer esta breve introdução, e acima de tudo toda a comunidade ICS. E neste momento I will switch into English to what, after greeting, and of course all the people that are linked to the ICS community. Well, linguistics is never easy. The most importantly, I would like to greet and give a warm welcome on behalf of the ICS community, because I think it's a very shared welcome, to Professor Sue Scott. Sitting here today, thank you so much on behalf of all of us here today for being here with us and for sharing with us the topic that brought you here today and that you are going to talk about, and that we think it's very important. But before that, I think it's my role to do a very brief and, of course, and short presentation of our guest speaker. I wrote quite a bit, and it's not so much about a career and track record, full of extensive and brilliant writings about sexuality, gender topics that really interest me as well. So thank you very much for your great contribution. But I think I would like to emphasize that at many levels, and I think that it's very important given the topic today. Sue Scott has quite an impressive career. She kind of covers all the bases that are important when defining a career. And I know, and we know today with the internet and everything online, so easy, which I think it's great, we can just immediately Google and see everything she's published, almost everything. It's very difficult to say something that is meaningful and relevant about the person. The track record is visible to all of those who are interested in the track record. So I probably skip a description of the publications, though I will kind of invite everyone who is interested in gender, sexuality, and risk, and sociology in general, and social sciences, to go and check the publications and a very interesting track record of Sue Scott. We know that she's a sociologist, and so, well, so are we, but we are really embracing all the social sciences. And she's also a feminist researcher from age 17. If I'm not wrong, you said it, so Sue. And I think it's very important. I can relate to that. Which over the years, as indeed as I said, made relevant contributions to the areas I mentioned, sexuality, gender, or the study of risk. I've read some of the publications, and I think these undertakings that really are exemplary of our academic achievements, I've also the merit of helping to develop what is yet sometimes neglected area of sociology. We have some examples of people here who are interested in the topic, but overall we think that sexuality is still sometimes under development. Some say so. And currently, and describing what Sue Scott says about herself, she's exploring the connections between practice theory and the sociology of sexuality, which I think is very important. And for more information on her scientific achievements, I would frankly suggest collecting more information, very detailed, on the site of the Center for Women's Studies of the University of York, where she is an honorary professor of sociology and women's studies. She is also a visiting professor at the University of Helsinki and holds an honorary professor fellowship at the University of Edinburgh. So I think her scholarly belongings and affiliations and achievements are quite impressive. But of paramount importance, I think, for our purpose here today is also to note Sue Scott's experience and success, which sometimes is not at all easy, in obtaining research awards and grants from various highly prestigious institutions, among which the Economic and Social Research Council, the Leverhulme Trust, the Medical Research Council, or the NHS, the National Health Service in the UK. Alongside with this competitive experience, of which sometimes metrics are very important in order to get the funding, Professor Scott has also a vast experience not only at being evaluated, but also as an advisor and as an evaluator. She knows the two sides of the process, and I think this is extremely important. And as an example, she has served as a member of the Economic and Social Research Council, Grant Board, and is currently a member of the Economic and Social Research Council. I'm not very good at saying ESRC, so I have to say the full name, Advisory Group on the Future of Research in the UK and Scotland. Well, and let's leave the discussion on the Scottish referendum aside on this matter. And furthermore, she's also a member of the International Advisory Board for the University of Helsinki, among other positions and experiences. And you might miss the gaps. I think it was important to emphasize this vast experience because it sets the tone for the discussion that we are having here today. And on a final note, or maybe two final notes, I would like also to emphasize the commitment of Professor Scott in the service to the sociological community. It's not easy, but it's not easy to be engaged in that service, and it requires a certain kind of spirit. She has an important role as president of the European Sociological Association, as most of us know. But before that, she was also the president of the British Sociological Association from 2007 to 2009. And she also served 2 terms on the executive committee of the BSA. I think this is really an important experience. And I would say that it's important to see Sue Scott as both an insider to the rules of the academic game, where she has been successful, by the way, and as a critical voice of those rules that dominate that same system, which puts her in a particularly influential and privileged position to act in a critical, constructive manner from all of us can learn. And last but not least, I think she also, we can take advantage of her knowledge to also expand our views on a topic that we have been discussing, outreach. What is the role of sociology/social sciences today, when the figure of the dated public intellectual is probably fading away? And I think she has made an excellent contribution to that when being managing director of Discover Society. And I would really advise, I know Discover Society, I'm not going to explain how, but I think it's very important to notice that this is a key outlet that we should take in consideration and visit. It's engaging, there's lots of things to read, and we can learn how to have a voice for a wider audience beyond all the walls of the academia. For the Discovery Society, I think it's a free online monthly magazine that it's aimed to bring current social research, policy analysis, and commentary to a wide audience, to the lay public. And I think it's fundamental to make our work visible in many forms and in many outlets. This was a brief, or perhaps not so brief summary. I hope to have made justice to your work. But my intention was to give some context to to the introduction of Sue Scott's keynote address, that it's not about the work, but precisely, as you all know, the title is When Excellence is Not Good Enough, Reflections on Research, Evaluation and Assessment. Of course, I know that it's difficult to say something relevant, but I would like, because you all have the abstract and we are looking forward to hearing what Sue has to say to us today. But my final comment in this humble introduction is limited to just noting the importance of reflecting on evaluation. This has been done, but it's not been done enough. It's still an issue of today and an issue of the future that really concerns all of us as a community, regardless of our role in that community. And to extend our questioning of the topic and the criteria and processes that really are related to evaluation. And I'm certain that the key note of today will lead us to questioning further the extent to which this current culture of metric evaluation can be complicit with the reproduction of precarity in academic settings. We have to really talk explicitly about that. And secondly, very importantly as well, it is also key for all of us to ask to which extent this evaluation culture can undermine, well, this is contentious, but it's for future reflection, the very possibility of doing solid and innovative research in the social sciences. We can agree that evaluation is avoidable and needed, but we have to question the adequacy or the inadequacy of evaluation processes and practices, as some mechanisms often put in place might constitute an hindrance at a variety of levels, including the quality and impact of scientific production itself. And I think this is quite serious. So, and bearing this in mind, with this note, and without further ado, thank you so much. I will immediately give the floor to Sue Scott. Thank you, and a warm welcome for you. Thank you so much.
Obrigado, Sophia. Thank you so much for embarrassing me totally, and for a very thorough discussion of some of my activities over what has been a long career. So if it sounds like a lot of things, just remember that I'm quite old, so I've had a lot of time. Okay, and okay, is that okay? Lovely. Thank you. Thank you very much. If you don't mind, I'm going to sit, not because I'm not capable of standing, but because I need to be able to see the screen. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm absolutely delighted to speak to you, although I do think that Sophia has got to the heart of the issue already, and perhaps she could have carried on and done better than I can. But thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to your beautiful city. I've only been to Lisbon once before for the ESA conference in 2009, and I promised that I'd come back very quickly, but I didn't come back very quickly for all kinds of reasons, but here I am now. Okay. I'm not sure I can really live up to that, but what I'm going to try to do is explore the background to research evaluation and assessment, taking the UK as a case study. Some of that I think is quite dull. I hope I don't bore you, but in order to understand the kind of depth of it and the length of it, it is quite important to run through the way that it's changed over 30 years of research evaluation in the UK. I will also say something about what's happening in Europe, about the relationship, and to try to reflect on the pluses and minuses of the process. So I'm going to skip over the abstract. You've got it. I won't live up to it. Do we ever live up to our abstracts? I wish we did. I wish I did. That's a sort of slightly different take on my background. in that it's stressing that I have actually been responsible in my work roles for engaging with research assessment from a university point of view. So as a faculty dean, I had to be responsible for bringing together the research assessment across the humanities and social sciences at the University of Kiel for the 2008 research assessment exercise. And as Vice Rector, Pro-Vice Chancellor for Research in Glasgow, which was my last full-time job before I became free, I was responsible for coordinating what became the Research Excellence Framework across the whole university. Sophia's very kindly mentioned Discover Society. I'd be delighted if you read it. I'd be even more delighted if some of you would think about publishing with us. Okay, so the slides are there as background. I will speak through them. I will say other things as well, but I think given that I'm speaking English, I'm sure your English is very good, but I don't want to make assumptions. So I thought it was best to put quite a lot of information on the slides. So since the 1980s, there has been an increase in audit culture everywhere, but certainly in the UK, focused on the health service, on many other areas of the state and social welfare, but also strongly on higher education. And the focus has been on assessing excellence in both teaching and research. So we've had teaching quality reviews over that period as well, actually slightly longer than that. And we now have a teaching excellence framework as well. And that's an interesting parallel, because what happened with that was that over time, the state decided that really it was pretty clear that teaching was okay and where it was okay, and the touch, the interrogation or the evaluation became lighter and lighter. And then something shifted with the Higher Education Act in 2017. There was a move back in the context of student fees, in the context of expectations that have been built for students, that university teaching needed to be evaluated even more strongly. So we're dealing with both those issues in the UK at the same time. So that's important in terms of thinking about the pressures on academics. It's important to understand that UK universities are not state institutions. We're not civil servants, as you are, as I understand it, and never have been. Autonomous institutions in receipt of public funds is the term. But we did used to have tenure, but we haven't had tenure in the UK since 1982. It was quite an early process in the Thatcher government to abolish tenure for academics. But we do, of course, have permanent contracts, pretty secure permanent contracts in the main. And of course, the UK has far more academics on permanent contracts than I think any other country in Europe. So we have a very different kind of base, if you like, a lot more security, although that security is also threatened. So in the 80s, the government wanted to increase student numbers. There was also the decision to grant the former polytechnics university status, so the sector was growing. So that potentially makes research much more expensive. So something had to be done, it was thought, so that money wasn't being spent where it didn't need to be spent. So what we have is a dual support system, funding that comes through the research councils, government money that goes to research councils, that comes back to academics on application. Now, what's happened with that over the period is that more and more of that money has become focused on particular topics and issues, so that a smaller and smaller proportion, although still, I think, about 30% for the social sciences, is responsive. So about 30% of that funding comes to academics for things that we want to do, but the rest of it is focused around topics. So there's been a narrowing of that space, I guess, over time. And there was a clear expectation by government at that point that funds would be directed, research funds, from the other side of the dual system, so direct money from the state to the universities, would be directed to smaller and smaller numbers of institutions. And this process has occurred, but it hasn't been as easy as I think the government thought it would be at that point. And it's a particular problem for the social sciences, because in the UK, excellence in social science is not concentrated in the Golden Triangle, Oxbridge and London. It's the excellence in social research, much of it is in the newer universities, in what we call the Robbins universities, the campus universities that were built in the 1960s at a point when social science was expanding, and particularly for sociology expanding, and some of the very best work has been there. So it didn't fit this pattern in the way that STEM disciplines did more closely fit that pattern of Oxbridge, Imperial College, and some of the big civic universities. The intention was, of course, to move more resource towards science, technology, engineering, and medicine, and that has also occurred. Seen to be more useful, seen to be closer to the market. But before I get into more detailed discussion, I want to make two background comments. And one is something that I believe strongly, despite my trenchant criticisms of research evaluation and the ways it's been done. There are very good and very strong reasons for evaluating academic research, especially research which utilises public funds and should therefore produce public value, in my opinion. It's the definition of what constitutes value and also what constitutes excellence that produces the problem, and the methodology for doing that. So I think it's perfectly fine that we put our work forward and say, is this good enough? Is this good enough in academic terms? And if it's intended to make a social difference, is it good enough in those terms? But who decides and how is the big question. And the other thing I want to say as background is that many people, including many academics, use the term neoliberalism in a very loose and sloppy kind of way. It's become a sort of shorthand for things that we think are bad about what the state does. That can be very unhelpful. However, it is relevant in the context of the development of research assessment and other changes to the university system in the UK. And the International Monetary Fund has described the privatisation programme for universities in the UK, and it is a privatisation programme, and in which the research framework, it doesn't make any sense. It basically, like before assessment. Well, when I was a graduate student in the late 1970s at the University of Lancaster, some social science was funded by the then Social Science Research Council and by other bodies, the Leverhulme Trust, the Gulbenkian Foundation, the Nuffield Trust, etc. But there was actually quite a lot of suspicion. And my first academic research post was as a research fellow on a Social Science Research Council funded project. And the response of many of my colleagues at the University of Lancaster was that we had, to use an English expression, taken the king's shilling. So we'd sold out. We'd sold out to state funding. So that was the climate then, that really research should be totally independent of state funding. What a long way we've come in a sense in the battle and the scramble that we now have in order to get funding for research. The focus was largely on scholarship, on small-scale projects. I mean, yes, there were large-scale quantitative projects that were funded, but much social science was very small-scale. It required relatively little financial support. The time to do research was seen as part of a standard academic contract, which was generally in the ratio 40-40-20. Would that were still the case. And now the time allocated to undertake research for academics in the UK is on the basis of the outcome of the research assessment. So if your unit of assessment, your department or your discipline in a university has a high grade and money has come in relation to that, the university doesn't always, but usually diverts at least a reasonable proportion of that money to the unit of assessment to pay for research time for academics. That money used to come in centrally from government, and it was just there, basically, and now it's competed for. Okay? And it's very, very rare that anybody has more than 20% of their time to do research unless they have other funding to do it. In the very strongest, I'm using sociology as an example, but just because I've got examples, but in the strongest social science departments, such as sociology at the University of Manchester or sociology at the University of York, which were ranked more or less first equal in the 2014 research exercise, you might get close to 40% of research time, but only if you're absolutely up at the top there. And of course, the proportion of time spent doing administration is getting larger all the time. So there was an assumption in and by the Thatcher government back in the 80s that universities needed to do much more for the country. Nothing wrong with that in itself, but the aim was to make the UK sector much less dependent on public money and much more like the system in the United States, and therefore better. In fact, the UK research then and now is amongst the most highly ranked in the world by whatever measure you take. And I decided I wasn't going to bore you with lots of tables and figures. They're in the public domain. If size is taken into account, we do, to coin a phrase, punch well above our weight. For the size of the country, we're way ahead of the US. So that was the case then, that's the case now, but we've been through a very complicated and expensive process over 32 years to stay in the same place in the rank order, if you like. We'll come back to that. Basically, there was a lack of trust in the sector, and I think there's still a lack of trust in the sector. And I think sometimes as academics we've been our own worst enemies in not engaging sufficiently. So that what happened post-1982 with the cutbacks, major cutbacks in the sector, particularly in social science, particularly in sociology, with the loss of tenure, I think the view was, let's just keep below the radar. Let's not rock the boat. Let's just get on. And perhaps nobody will make any more cuts, they won't notice us. And I think that was probably largely a mistake, because what we didn't do is shout loudly, not in protest, we did a bit of that, maybe we should have done some more, but we didn't shout loudly about all the good things we were doing, about all the positive things, about the way that our research did make a difference in lots of policy contexts, to people's lives, etc., and also to the development of the discipline and other disciplines. And that's an important point, that the social sciences in general and sociology in particular has had a huge impact on the development of other disciplines. So there is a view now that the university in the UK is neoliberal. I think that's highly debatable, I would say. I think this is an example of perhaps using the term too loosely. My colleague John Homewood would disagree with me on that, and I should say that a lot of the discussion behind what I'm talking about has been had in debate with Professor John Homewood, and also in debate with Professor Alan Ward, who was an assessor for sociology in the last assessment exercise. So, vice-chancellors, rectors in your system are often accused of being neoliberal. My experience of being on 3 university senior management boards is that that's not the case. I've been a vice-rector. saw very little evidence of that being their position, but caught in a very difficult place, expected to be part of a market in higher education, which is not necessarily what any of us expected when we joined the club, if you like. It is increasingly the case in the UK that students are seen as consumers. You probably hear that students pay very high fees in UK universities. They don't actually pay fees up front. It's a loan that they have to pay back, but it is £9,000 a year. What the government hoped for was that there'd be a huge differential and that the top universities would charge the top fees and those further down the chain would charge much less. But which university leader is going to stand up and say, my university's not as good as the one next door? Why would you do that? Why would you do that? So almost all universities, there are 2 or 3 exceptions, charge £9,000 a year to be paid back later when students earn over, I'm just translating into euros, about 26,000 euros they start paying back. Of course, most of that money won't ever get paid back. There's a cut-off on it. And that means that it's a very expensive, complex system that actually, is not going to reap the kind of rewards that it was supposed to. Okay, there is now a marketplace in higher education. I think I heard the Vice-Rector mention rankings and world universities and global universities. We're in a global market. And that is another huge pressure. And one of the things I want to say is that there is a tension between the methodology and the ranking systems in the world rankings, both the Times Higher Education and Shanghai and the others, that with internal national research assessments. The expectation is that students will do degrees which will make them employable, rather than degrees which will make them educated, critical citizens. And that creates a problem for the social sciences. So what's happened through this whole process is that there is increasing competition rather than collaboration. That universities are divided from each other in the UK, collaboration is not as easy as it used to be, and academics are locked into competition. And there are lots of contradictions that I'll talk about later. I'm not going to dwell on this. I just did find some information about research assessment here in Portugal. I gather you're about to go through a new process, but my friend and colleague Rosemary Deem, I think, was an assessor here in 2013, so I read what she had to say, and looking at the tension between a metric-driven approach in Portugal and the peer review approach that we have in the UK. I'm very interested and would be interested to talk to you after about the appeal process, because we don't have any such process in the UK. There is no appeal against the grading at all. But I don't need to, I put that very odd English expression there about not teaching my grandmother to suck eggs. I don't want to patronise you by pretending I know more than I do about the Portuguese system. So, research assessment in the UK. The current research assessment is called the REF, the Research Excellence Framework, and this is the official definition from the Higher Education Funding Council's soon-to-be Research England website. An internationally recognised system for assessing the quality of research in UK higher education, and that's what it provides. So research is defined as a process of investigation leading to new insights effectively disseminated within the wider academic domain. And that's interesting, because my worry is that we're moving away from the encouragement of new insights towards a normalisation of science across all disciplines. That worries me. And that we're focusing increasingly on the potential for short-term effect outside of the academic domain, rather than short, medium and long-term effects within the academic domain, and an understanding that it takes quite a long time for research to have an effect out with. Okay, very, very quickly. As I said, it's over 30 years since we started this business. I think I've said that. So this could be seen as state more. The contradiction is that given the intention to shrink the state, that actually more state intervention was happening in universities than had ever happened before. But it's state control in order to enable state involvement to shrink in the longer term. I think that's the way to think about it. 1986 research selectivity exercise was a bit of a mess. I think somebody has said to me that, you know, maybe you didn't get it sorted in Portugal first time round. We definitely didn't get it sorted in 1986, so it was a sort of dipstick, and I'm not going to dwell on that. It was so contested that they did it again in 1989, which must have been a very expensive thing to do that quickly. And the baseline was that every academic and everybody had to put in 2 publications. So just 2 publications. I can't find a record of over what period, and I can't remember. But I think it was in the previous 5 years. That's what my memory tells me. And that doesn't sound too onerous, really, does it? No. And I don't think we were taking it very seriously, really. In the 1989 exercise, I was the most junior lecturer in the University of Manchester Sociology Department. And myself and a visiting research fellow, who some of you may know, Professor Geoffrey Weeks, who was spending a sabbatical year with us, were asked to write this general statement about the state of research in the sociology department, and that's how seriously the head of department was taking it at the time. Little did he know. I think we made quite a good job of it. Manchester did okay, but considering how serious it's become since, I think that's an interesting little biographical note. So, it was done again in 1992, and that's really the beginning properly of research assessment as we know it, because it then included all of these new post-92 ex-polytechnics, and that put much more pressure on potential research funds. So, you know, it was clear there was going to be more and more selectivity at that point. The 1992 research assessment exercise allowed universities to select which staff would be put forward. So before that, you know, everybody who was on an academic, you know, a standard, what we call a funding council contract, was submitted. As soon as they introduced this change, the possibilities of playing games just opened up. So in the name of strategy, in the name of getting a better score, but perhaps less money because you'd put less people in, but the very visible thing about UK research assessment is that score, that number that's attached to each unit of assessment, each discipline that a university puts forward. So in the name of ensuring a better score, people were left out who either didn't have enough publications or who had publications that weren't deemed good enough. So there's a game there in terms of who gets included and excluded. The problem in that context was that at the same time, research environment was becoming to be seen as much more important. And that meant that, and there was a view that size really mattered, so that there was a push for departments and units and centres to focus on particular areas of strength, so that if your work didn't fit in these research clusters or research groupings, then you were at risk of being left out, even if you had full publications. That has changed, but people don't quite believe it, so there's still that issue. And it's been a huge problem for people. It's been a particular problem in disciplines like sociology, where, and a huge problem in the humanities, where there's a lot of lone scholarship, and people are working on very particular things that don't always need to be in a larger grouping. So that was a real issue. It meant, I mean, people's careers were irreparably damaged, really, at that point. And at that stage, I think I'd just moved as a senior lecturer to the University of Stirling. I'm going to weave this with a little bit of biography. I'll try and speed up a bit, though. And I thought, I did genuinely think that research assessment was a good thing. I could see some problems with it, but I felt that people hadn't actually been putting their best foot forward. We hadn't been doing enough research. We hadn't really been trying to get research joined up to do bigger things, to make connections, and that there were certainly people in university departments who weren't doing anything very much. And that when you're working really hard yourself, that can make you a bit annoyed, a bit irritated. So it seemed reasonable to kind of push people a bit harder to fulfill their obligations across the whole contract. But it's gone much, much further than that, really. I think the days of being able to kind of cruise along as a senior academic, not doing very much, are long, long gone. And the idea that you could ever get a job in a UK university without already having enough publications for the next assessment exercise and a grant and some teaching experience, they're long gone as well. So that's all behind us. If you know, to the extent that it was an issue. Okay, so I'm just talking about how it's changed a bit. The grading began to change, and you can sort of see what's happening. That the grading's sort of moving up and down, getting more concentrated. It was grades 1 to 5 initially, and it wasn't the end of the world. You got a bit of money, whatever grading you got. Over time, that money has been concentrated more and more, so that in the last exercise in 2014, there was virtually no funding for departments that got a grade 2 overall, and nothing below that. And I'll show you in a minute what a grade 2 means, and you can think about whether that's okay. In the next exercise, the 2021 exercise, it looks as though there'll be no funding for anything under a 4-star or a 3-star, which are now the top 2 grades. So there are only 4 grades now. Okay. I think the 5-star, well, I know the 5-star was introduced in 1996 in order to stretch the top end. And again, it really looks as though that was a way of trying to show that the top universities really had the top departments. And it worked to some extent. It worked to some extent because they had the most money already and the biggest kit and all the rest of it. But it didn't work very well in the social sciences. So just to give you a couple of examples, Lancaster and Essex both got 5 stars in this exercise. Not overall the most prestigious universities in the UK. My department in Stirling submitted to social work and social policy, not to sociology in that exercise, and we got a 5-star. So social science didn't fit that pattern of Oxbridge, Imperial, King's College, London, etc. Okay, I'm not going to read all of that. You can see it. We'll move on. So, and that's just what I've said, that the grades change from 1 to 4-star. What we have now are umbrella panels for all the disciplines. So there's an overall panel that coordinates the individual subject panels for social science, for biomedical science, for humanities, etc. There was a decision to move to a fully metricated process after 2008. So the Funding Council thought they'd made that decision, but the plan was abandoned. They decided it wouldn't work, and I think that was a very positive move. It was certainly in some part because of strong lobbying from humanities and social science disciplines. So they did move to what is pretty well a metrics-driven approach for STEM subjects, for science, technology, engineering and medicine, and to a greater extent, greater or lesser extent for disciplines like psychology. The only social science that has any metrics used is economics. Any economists here? Economics in the UK, anyway, has a journal ranking that they're very committed to, so they were quite happy to have metrics for that. But in the other social sciences and the humanities, we argued very strongly that journal rankings wouldn't work, that research funding measures wouldn't work very well because so much of our research is funded through very small amounts of money, so we would never look very strong. But in terms of journal rankings, if you take a discipline like sociology, which is extremely diverse, and also much sociology is published in journals that are not sociology journals directly, because we export our discipline all over the place, it's actually very difficult. The most highly ranked journals are the American journals, the American Journal of Sociology, for example. Now, it's almost impossible for a UK scholar and maybe for a Portuguese scholar to get into that journal. I mean, there are an awful lot of American sociologists who are in the queue. But also, I don't know so much about Portugal, but UK sociology and US sociology is rather different. So it just doesn't work. And also, because there are all of these sub-disciplines, we actually argued that some of the smaller journals, so take my own field, the journal Sexualities, I would argue very strongly that the peer review in that journal is probably of much higher quality because it's extremely expert than peer review for an article of mine in a much more generic but much more highly ranked journal. So we had all of these debates, and the Funding Council ran a lot of measures and looked at it, and in the end they agreed with us. So we still don't have metrics, we have peer review. So that means that everything that's submitted, these 4 outputs, these 4 articles, books or musical scores or whatever that are entered per academic are read or looked at if they're videos, but let's say they're read for the sake of argument. They're read by members of an expert panel that belong to that discipline. And that is an extremely time-consuming, quite expensive process, but it is based on academic judgment. And I think we lose that sense of academic judgment at our peril. Although, having said that, and it's important that I say this now, lest I forget, there's been some work done which shows that if you ran the 2014 Research Excellence Framework on metrics at the university level, the funding would come out the same. So individual units wouldn't have scores, but the funding would look the same. So it could be done. You could say it would make no difference. It would make a lot of difference, you know, in particular institutions for particular disciplines. It would make no difference overall to the funding. The problem would be that it would then be up to individual universities to decide how that funding was dispersed, because it wouldn't be tied to particular disciplines. And it's not that I don't trust my friends who are vice-chancellors and rectors, but I think the pressure for that funding to be channeled much more towards STEM, and particularly towards biomedicine, would be enormous. I think the social sciences and the humanities would suffer if we had that process, but it would be much cheaper, it would be less painful overall. Okay, so what did we do next in the story of UK research assessment? What happens next? In 2014, we also, there was a move towards the focus being much more on impact and much less on esteem and environment. And that's, if you remember, I said before that these research groupings and research clusters, which had become almost obsessively part of everybody's research evaluation process, were actually much less important. But nobody believed it, so everybody's still been channeled into clusters. But this new area of impact caused a great deal of consternation, again, particularly in the social sciences and humanities, because there's no question it was brought into play in order to show which areas of UK university research were having the most economic impact initially. That has changed. That did get softened for 2014, so that social impact was in there. And for the next ref, it's very much in there, as I'll tell you in a minute. But there was an expectation by the government, by the Funding Council, that it would show how much impact science and technology were making, and probably that social sciences and humanities were not worth the money that they were getting. And in fact, that isn't what happened at all. And if I had more time, and I can certainly send you, if you're interested, the distribution of what happened with the impact case studies. So each unit that was to be assessed had to submit one impact case study per 10 full-time members of staff. So one initial one and then one more for every 10 members of staff that they submitted. So most sociology departments were putting in 3 or 4 impact case studies. And they were graded as well, 1 star to 4 star, with 4 being the top. And overall, we did incredibly well, and it made a big difference. But more importantly, perhaps, in terms of the visibility of social science, and I say this wherever I get the opportunity in the UK, some research that was undertaken by Professor Jonathan Grant at University, at King's College London, on behalf of the Funding Council, to look at the impact case studies and their content over the whole of the research assessment in 2014. So he did this huge bit of research with his colleagues. 84% of all the impact case studies across all disciplines, across the whole exercise, had some social science in the case study. So I think that tells you something about how much science and technology need us. Now, I said to somebody earlier that it's actually a bit of an irony in the UK that the organisation that puts the most money into social science research, just pound for pound, is the Engineering Research Council. Unfortunately, most of what they fund are just sort of quick surveys. They just want a bit of help, or they want us to persuade people that their bridges aren't going to fall down, or that this new road is a good idea. Sorry, I don't mean to be... Engineers are very, very important people, but it's not fundamental research. But there is a lot of money there, and I think if we were better at shouting about how good we are and partnering with engineering and science, and I know lots of us do, and I know lots of us get very tired of being, you know, second fiddle, of being the handmaid to perhaps more powerful disciplines. But I think that's changing. I think there is real potential for much more collaboration there that would be in our interests. How am I doing for time?
You're doing fine.
Okay, I'll carry on if you can bear with me. Okay, so the other issue that's been introduced there are international assessors. I think that's quite important. I know you do that. I think it's very challenging because you have to get your head around a whole system. I've just been doing this for 2 universities in Finland, and it's a very different system, and you know, a challenge, but a good thing. Okay, Ref 2021. We had a report from Lord Nicholas Stern, which was commissioned by the Funding Council to look at whether the ref should ever be done again, really, and if so, how. Nick Stern is a social scientist by background, so that was quite helpful and positive. He did think that the ref should continue, but he thought that the gaming, the playing of games that I talked about earlier, should cease as much as possible. And that, for that reason, he said that everybody should be included. Everybody with research in their contract should be included so that departments couldn't pick who would be in, so there wouldn't be the kind of exclusion that there was before. So all staff with significant responsibility for research are to be included. The percentage of the grade for impact is to go up to 25%. Again, trying to push that boundary, I think, trying to see if all disciplines can meet that level. So much greater stress on social impact. That's a good thing. That's very clear in the impact statement. And also that staff who've retired, even staff who died, can be included if they were producing work within the period since the previous exercise. And staff who move to another university can count in both. So that stops the what's the word I want? A word from football. Yes. Sorry, yes, I've lost the word. But that game playing, the transfer market, which was a very big thing. You know, universities were literally buying professors in the run-up to research assessment exercises to try and boost their grades. So this is an attempt to try and stop that happening. There's also been a decision that all journal articles submitted to the REF will be open access. And I'll come back to that later in terms of open access and monographs. Okay. Oh, well, I've come back to it now. So I thought I had another slide in between. So we're already talking about REF 2027, and we haven't even submitted for REF 2021. This is what it's like in the UK. You've seen the future. Okay, so there's a consultation which closed last Friday. I mean, this talk has been evolving just in the last few days, really. So a consultation that closed last Friday with individual researchers, learned societies and publishers about whether monographs should be open access for REF 2027. But that has actually somewhat been overtaken by the fact that Research England, the government, the body that has taken over from the Funding Council, has just signed up to Science Europe's Plan S. How many of you have heard of Plan S? You will. You will in a minute. Be very afraid. Okay. So, just quickly, I'll come back to it. Plan S, which Portugal has not yet signed up to, but 12 European countries have, states that all publicly funded research is to be open access by January 2020. Okay? Just hold that thought. This is just the definition of the grades in our assessment exercise. So all I want to do really is point to the 2-star grade there. So quality that is recognised internationally in terms of originality, significance and rigour is not being funded anymore. There's no money for grades below 3 and 4 star. Now, any individual unit that's assessed gets a profile. You know, it's not about individuals, it's about the overall profile. So all of these items are submitted, they're all graded, and then it's all calculated. But the overall amount of money will be dependent on what level of 3 and 4 star in that unit. 2-star work is perfectly good work. I know I've done 2-star work. I'm pretty certain lots of you have. It's not bad work. Now, the Vice-Rector's gone, but any other scientists in the room might violently disagree with me, but it would be my view that if you're an astrophysicist, the likelihood of you getting 2-star work published is very low because of the nature of the discipline and because of the kind of funding and because of the way that research builds incrementally on research that, you know, the idea of normal science, it's likely to be 3 and 4 star work if it's out there in those journals. Social science isn't like that. We have, you know, we don't have a homogenous position. We don't have one kind of epistemological view, or however we want to talk about it. There are lots of different ways of doing things. We're exploring new issues all the time. We're not always working in big teams. You know, career young people are encouraged to publish on their own for all of those reasons. You know, some of our work is it might produce 4-star work in the longer term by this definition, but, you know, there's nothing wrong with 2-star work. And if we can't do that work, it may be that we can't do the 4-star work, and that really worries me. Okay. These are the definitions. Can you read? Yes, it is big enough. Originality, rigour and significance are the criteria that are used for the peer review that the panels use to read all of these items that are submitted. And I've been using this. I'm currently, what happens in the UK is that in order to try and second guess what the outcome can be, every university employs external people to read the stuff before it gets submitted to be read. And it is a bit nonsense, but my view is, maybe this sounds arrogant, but my view is I'd rather it was me that was reading it for the department and giving them feedback while it might be possible to make some difference than somebody else reading it for the university when it's too late to make any changes. So I read a lot of drafts for 2 universities in the UK, and I try to apply this criteria as much as is feasible. Okay. That's the definition of impact, which I should have put in earlier, sorry. Okay. You can have these slides. I'm seeing, you know, don't worry about taking notes. Okay. So, I think I've actually covered this already. The big difference here is that because everybody can be submitted who has research in their contract, if everybody submitted 4 articles, it would put the quantum of work up by over 20%. That was the calculation. I don't know exactly, can't remember exactly what, but it would make the exercise much more complex, expensive to get all that extra reading done. So what they've said is that people can submit between 1 and 5 pieces, and the university will decide who's going to put 5 in, who's only going to put 1 in. It does make it much more feasible for people at the start of their career who've only got 1 very strong piece to be submitted. That's a good thing. There is, of course, a danger that people who have 5 pieces will be seen as more prestigious, and that because there's a limit to how many people can be submitted overall, that people with fewer outputs or not quite such clear 3 or 4 star outputs will be moved on to teaching only contracts. And that's a really big worry. That's not, this is when I talk about unintended consequences, that wasn't what the Funding Council, certainly not what Nick Stern intended. He was trying to move away from playing those games, but there's already evidence that that's beginning to happen, that people who are not seen as 3 and 4 star. In fact, I did a review of the School of Social Sciences at the University of Manchester last year, and just before I started the review, an email went round to all staff at the University of Manchester from the President's office, President at the University of Manchester, not Vice-Chancellor, saying basically that all staff would be expected to have publications of 3 and 4 star level for Ref 2021. And I'm not going to give you the exact wording because I can't remember it, but the implication was that if they didn't, there would be a discussion that could involve the Human Resources Department. Now that is a clear statement of potential contractual change. And when I wrote my report, in the executive summary, I made a statement that I thought for social science and humanities this was an extremely foolish think, I didn't put it quite like that, but it wasn't a very sensible thing to do because of the way the disciplines work, because of what I've said, because of what you know, that actually to do that would be excluding lots of very good researchers who were, you know, developing, and also because I certainly have a profile. You know, I think if I put something together now, there might be 1 4-star piece, 2 3-star pieces, and a 2-star piece. You know, that's the profile. So that there's a real danger. And I had this conversation with the dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, in which social science sits, and he said, "I wish you hadn't said that. It makes my life difficult." And I said, "Well, here's the evidence. You know, in order for that to be achieved in the next ref, this is the amount that the decision making would have to shift from the normal curve. This is what would have to happen." And I'd got all these diagrams, and I showed him all the data. And he said, "Okay, you're right, I agree, but I still wish you hadn't said it." And I said, "Well, why?" And he said, "Because that's what the senior management team have decided that they want." And I'm afraid my response to that was, "But it's your job to persuade them that that doesn't make any sense. And you can't have one size that fits all across a university the size of the University of Manchester." I don't know what's happened yet, but we'll see. Okay. Okay, nearly there. I could say quite a bit about interdisciplinarity, but I think I'll leave that aside. If you want to know what I think about interdisciplinarity, I've written stuff about it that you could look at. Okay. So, lots of unintended consequences. What all I'll say about interdisciplinarity is that in the UK there's been a lot of university restructuring, some of it for very good reasons, some of it in order to mean that there are fewer people that the Vice-Chancellor needs to talk to in management terms. So there's been a lot of creating bigger schools, bigger faculties. In the social sciences, that's often meant bringing together sociology, social policy, social work, etc. In terms of research assessment, because there's an assumption that you need to have scale and that it's easier if the ref maps onto a physical unit, that has meant, hang on, I'll miss that one. No, it's disappeared. Anyway, I'll say it. That has meant that between the 2001 exercise and the 2004 exercise, the number of submissions to the sociology panel reduced from 62 to 29, because it's possible and much easier to submit sociology to social work and social policy than it is the other way round. Social work doesn't play well necessarily, but sociology you can put that way. That's what's happened. That has made sociology relatively invisible. It's made it become increasingly invisible. It's meant that it's not visible in the same, if potential PhD students or international researchers are looking for a grading in sociology, it's not there because it's in social work and social policy. So there are these kinds of consequences that are really problematic. I won't talk about psychology because of time. Okay, what are the good things? We can show that we produce public value. It is important. There's been much more importance placed on research than back in the 70s when I was being told I shouldn't be taking money from the Funding Council. There has been an increase in research and publications. I think there's actually been too much publishing. That would be my view, far too much publishing. But even though we only have to produce 4 things for the ref, the pressure to produce 24 things is enormous. And the best thing that we could all do is work harder on the things that we do that we think are good, rather than produce another 6. So that bit between getting the referee's feedback and the final submission is the most important bit. There's more transparency. there's less of a halo effect. When I was a young academic, you know, people would just say, oh, you know, that professor's wonderful, he has done this, that. Nobody looked at each other's CVs, nobody really knew what anybody was doing in that sort of way. There's been much greater equity across gender and generation because it's the quality of the work that matters. And because of the bureaucratic processes that wrap around it, some of those are good, some of those are supportive. Particularly, there's a very clear equal opportunities framework in the assessment exercise that has been very supportive in relation to women taking maternity leave, for instance. Those things are good. Minuses, the weakening of the disciplinary community, narrowing of research interests in order to try and fit into these clusters and also to try and fit into research council priorities, increasing policy focus because we think that's what will make the greatest impact, and that's not necessarily the case, increased pressure on everybody, and that's getting more with the possibility of teaching-only contracts, greater competition between colleagues for research money, internal gaming I've talked about, the effects of being excluded, which can be dreadful, the effects of, as a university manager, of having to exclude people are bad enough, never mind what it does to people being excluded. The growth of 0 hours contracts, and if you forgive me, I will just spend half a minute on that. There's a lot of talk at the moment about universities, and that means senior management, creating 0 hours contracts in the UK. So staff who are working on hourly contracts who don't know from 1 year to the next. Actually, we as academics made that happen. And it's one of the very negative things about research assessment, because when the research assessment really kicked in, we all wanted to be top-flight researchers, and we all wanted somebody else to do our teaching. And I think there's case for reflection there. And you have a very different kind of setup and a different career structure, but I still think there's something to be learned from what happened in the UK there. So, you know, status went to research, and, you know, senior people just didn't want to do teaching anymore, which is tragic. Okay, the transfer market I've mentioned, and the reification of STEM disciplines. I think we've seen a narrowing of the research base overall. We've seen the increased power of the Russell Group in the UK. The Russell Group are, the group's getting bigger. Everybody wants to join. They were a group of universities whose vice-chancellors met in the Russell Hotel for afternoon tea after their big meeting. This is back in the 1980s. They met for afternoon tea in the... Isn't England quaint? After their meetings, the universities that all had medical schools, and they met to discuss what a headache medical schools were, what a problem it was, because they couldn't afford them really. And what's happened over the years is all of that cross-subsidy from humanities and social sciences to support medicine. Of course, it's not saying it's not important, but that's how the Russell Group happened. It's become a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. That group is now seen as the group of top research universities, and it just goes round and round. Okay, the creation of a university marketplace, the kind of contradiction that it's not always the highest quality research that produces the greatest impact, which is a tension in this process. Overpublication, lowering of morale, the undervaluing of scholarship, which is what often goes behind, especially theoretical research, assumptions about quality regardless of journal rankings and chapters, so that people make assumptions that publications should be in particular places, even though in the past you could get just as high grade for a book chapter if it was good. It's the quality that mattered. I've said something about university reorganisation. Interdisciplinarity I'm going to leave. The danger of playing safe, I don't think I need to say more about that. The effects on panel members. In the early stages, panel members were vilified for being involved in the process. It was seen to be a dreadful thing to be doing, to be selling out. Now I think we feel we really need good people to be doing that because in general they're on our side. And the contradiction between the REF and the World Rankings, because the World Rankings does use journal rankings and other kind of metrics, a completely different methodology, so that regardless of what the REF is saying for humanities and social sciences, regardless of what the REF is saying, university senior managers are saying, well, you have to be in the top journals because that's what the World Rankings are looking at. Europe follows where the UK leads? Well, not entirely, thank goodness, in this case. Many European countries have followed, but they haven't done it in the same way because it was thought to be too complex. But what they have done, and what Portugal seems to have done, is focus on metrics. And I've been very concerned in my role as ESA president, talking to people around Europe, to discover that journal rankings are really taking hold, and this is causing huge problems, particularly for career young scholars. And finally, can I just say 1 minute about Plan S? And this is, I've added this to the talk, and this is why indulge me and let me go over time just for a minute, because it's so important. So, as I said before, there was a clear expectation that journal articles would be open access for 2021, and a consultation about monographs for 2027. But literally in the last month, the UK, along with 11 other EU countries, has signed up to Science Europe's Plan S for open access. Now, on the face of it, as an academic, we probably think open access is not a bad thing, that people having access to our work is a good thing. I want people to read my work. I work on Discover Society because I want people to know about social science research. But it really isn't that simple. And it's certainly making us very cross in the US that the consultation process has only just closed and Research England has already signed up to a plan that everything will be open access. And by open access, what Plan S means is no hybrids, no hybrid journals, journals which are open access. So that cuts through journal rankings, actually. It's going to completely disrupt journal rankings, which is interesting. But it's also going to, including the monographs, is going to completely wreck the business plans of all publishers. And they've not really had time and space to look at that. So what is going on? And the implications are, monographs are centrally important to what we do. And in the current debate, we're being told that the charge for producing an open access monograph could be around €15,000. So unless you have a major research grant, and I think most funding bodies are going to push people to produce journal articles anyway. So where is the funding going to come from for people to produce monographs? And in our fields, we have the kind of data that needs to have long length publications, I would say. Also, what's going to happen to the first book publication coming out of doctoral and postdoctoral work? So it's a particular issue. So the idea of open access, is really problematic for us. It fits with the market model, sadly, and I don't think this was Science Europe's intention. I think Science Europe is partly reacting to scientists' criticism of what big organisations like Elsevier are doing. But the unintended consequences are huge. So in the UK, with the development of private universities, it means that research work is accessible for institutions that want to use it, who are not funding research academics to do research, to use in their teaching. Plan S, hang on, I'm whizzing through it, because we can talk about this in discussion. Plan S says that the Creative Commons license that should be standard is a CC BY license. Now that's probably fine for most STEM disciplines, because if you're working in science and technology and you've got something you want to protect, you can take out a different license or you can patent it. It doesn't cover text. You need that ND, that no derivatives, on the end of the license for it to cover text. If there's no ND on the end of the license, that means that anybody can take an extract out of anything we've written and they can use it in a MOOC, in teaching materials. You know, Pearson's can put it on their platform. They can do anything with it and sell it again completely out of context. Now, I am not a woman who tends to paranoia, but these are serious issues. So we've got serious issues in relation to you know, the freedom to do the kind of research we need to be doing, and then in order to be able to publish the kind of research that we need to be publishing. So, you know, this is all going to make it much more difficult for critical disciplines like ours. And I think on that unhappy note,
thank you so much, Sue, for this very interesting and detailed and so reflective on all these issues. And you raised so many challenges. So I would like to open the debate, though I have a lot of questions here.
Let people escape.
Yes. But, of course, for us it's very challenging to see that the research excellence framework is distinguishing between the social sciences and humanities and the STEM disciplines. So does this mean that the metrics are not being used at all in the social sciences and humanities? That would just be a first question, and then I'll take... okay. I'm just going to fetch the rector, and I'll be back in a minute.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Any more questions, Sophia?
Shall I just answer that question?
Okay.
Do you want me to continue to collect?
Yeah.
There was somebody over there.
Do you prefer to answer the...
I will just quickly, because I obviously didn't state it clearly. Yes, that is what I mean, that in the UK, with the exception of economics, all social science and humanities disciplines are assessed by peer review, not by metrics. And we've hung on to that throughout this whole process. But as I also said, because the world rankings use different systems, there's a serious tension now for universities in the UK. So you have, on the one hand, you know, a department head saying, well, in my discipline, we don't need to be publishing in those journals, and a vice rector for research saying, well, yes, you do, because this is what we need on the list for the world rankings. So I don't know where that fight is going to end.
Okay, thank you. Yes?
Hi, my name is Nunes, and I'm a first-year PhD candidate in anthropology. Thank you so much for your intervention. It's a great honor to be able to be here with you and listen to you. I'd like to go to the beginning of the presentation and also to the transversal thing that you have said, that is universities having market logic. And when you talked about students as consumers, actually my PhD project will be about, I think, Chinese students in Portuguese universities. And I would like to know your opinion and your experience, because from my preliminary findings of my research project, I believe the case of international students is a very specific case, because they come to universities not only in Portugal but also in other places in Europe. They pay high fees, very high fees, and many times they are not counted on their potential difficulties. For example, in the Chinese case, you have Chinese students that come here are accepted, pay their tuition, and they actually don't have enough Portuguese to do their classes and their thesis. So, in your experience in the UK, in the management, how are universities catching up in taking care of their students that are paying to be there and to learn? Thank you.
Okay. Well, I'll answer that quite briefly, and maybe we could have a conversation afterwards, because I kind of want to focus more on research. But it does affect the research climate. So I didn't mention international students, but yes, they pay extremely high fees in the UK. And I think quite often, feel that they're not getting value for money when their English isn't necessarily always good enough, although often it is very good and it does get much, much better. But it goes back to what I was saying before about the effect of research assessment on who teaches and who wants to teach. So a lot of teaching in UK universities has over the years been done by relatively inexperienced teachers. Now, they're often very, very good, but there are particular challenges of teaching overseas students. So I think the fact that many full-time experienced academics have been resistant to doing seminar teaching, if you like, has had an effect on how students feel about what value they're getting in the university. So I would say that for starters, but we could have a much longer conversation, and if we can't have it today, we can have it in email. Okay?
Thank you. Well, if anybody wants to talk a bit more with Sue Scott, I mean, after we drink some port wine, you can come back into the Sala Polivalente and chat a bit more to her, okay? Okay, I'll take Maria do Mar and then Anna. You and Sofia. Microphone, Silvia. It's not on.
I can hear you, okay. But...
So, yes, well, I was thanking you for your presentation. My name is Maria, I'm Portuguese, but I've been working in the UK and at Warwick for a few years now, so going through all of these changes. And I want to pick up on something that you said that I think is crucial to all of this, although you said it in a sort of lighter and more flippant way, which is that none of this makes any sense. And everyone that you talk to and everyone that I talk to and work with everyone knows that it doesn't make any sense. And yet all of our lives are structured on the basis of this thing that makes no sense and that everyone knows makes no sense. And I mean, myself and lots of other people have been doing research and thinking about what this has been doing to the research. You identified some of those unintended consequences, but also what it's been doing to people's bodies and health and mental health issues and relationships in academia in the UK, but also in Portugal and elsewhere. So I guess my question is a weird one, but I'm curious to see how you'll respond to it. If this makes no sense and if it's effectively destroying people and destroying our research, when's the point at which everyone's going to say something's going to happen? You know, people have strokes, they die, they give up, they leave. It's happening already. So what's the point at which the senselessness of everything becomes so evident that we can no longer continue?
Certainly, yes.
Because my question goes in continuity with reflection. You said during your intervention that social sciences should be better at shouting at how good we are. So, with your experience, your academic and organizational experience, what kind of suggestions would you give us to be proactive in defending a certain way of making science and defending research? Because if everything makes no sense, how can we organize at a national level, at a European level, to impose some rationality?
Well, thank you. My question is a bit different, but it's something that really concerns me, and I think it can be everything has its own side effects. It has to do with originality. You mentioned, and quite well, the danger of playing safe. And for instance, originality was one of the three main criteria to make the assessment. But I was wondering, how can we reflect, and I think this is a quite serious business, on also the side effects or the dangers of being kind of pressured to be too original. For instance, I'm thinking of words like your research has to be original, groundbreaking, innovative. And these are words that really kind of are buzzwords. That are they really promoting novelty in a way that is solid, innovation in a clear-cut form that really promotes scientific development, or are just provoking, like, you know, kind of art attacks or crazy, to some extent, crazy ideas of fantastic people who see themselves, I have to invent something to be kind of groundbreaking, original. And that is not always the best road. How can we solve this problem?
Okay.
Or not, or maybe even start to address him, because I think it's something that is haunting all of us, originality.
Great question, Sophie. But I'll deal with them in order. When I say it makes no sense, it makes sense to some people.
Yes.
It makes sense to a government that wants to fund less, although the bit of that doesn't make sense is that, well, the government would also like more students to do science and technology subjects, employability, you know. But if that happened, because it costs far more to teach those students, then, you know, things would collapse at the other end. It's relatively cheap to teach social science and humanities students. So that's, you know, that's a bit of the sense and nonsense, but it does make sense so they wouldn't, you know, they wouldn't have as many students basically, and students pay fees, and that, well, they don't pay fees, as I said, but it's money in the system. So that's a contradiction. The issue that you're kind of touching on, I think, is it makes sense to people in STEM disciplines because they're getting funded, although I think many scientists would complain that they're being pushed in particular directions as well. I don't think it's a neat binary by any manner of means. It doesn't make sense to us as social scientists in that, you know, as you say, we're not being evaluated. But if the intention is that fewer of us are going to be funded to do research, then that, you know, that is what's happening, and people are falling by the wayside. It's happening in a very cruel kind of way, and you know, it would have been much. I mean, some incredibly good work has been done in the UK in the former polytechnics. There are some incredibly good social scientists in the former polytechnics, but it would actually have been much less cruel to say, look, we can't possibly fund all of these universities to do research, and to say that on the outset and create a more straightforward competition for how people got posts in places where they could do research. This is what I would describe as death by 1,000 cuts. You know, it just goes on and on and on and grinds and grinds and grinds. But having said that, some of the things that don't make sense, we've made worse. We've actually exacerbated because we've created a mythology that says only these publications count, when it's not the case, or only this kind of work counts, or you've got to be in a research cluster. And I'm sorry, I felt I had to explain the detail, because without the detail, it's hard to, you know, I feel like I've done this, and now I could actually go away and write a paper about it that was much more sociological. So thank you for listening and enabling me to do that. But I think that, you know, that way in which, and it's all quite understandable in sociological terms, the way those mythologies develop, especially when people are under pressure. And I think what we need to do now is have those conversations internally that unpick those things, and have very serious conversations with deans and with senior management, those of us that can, about how to make sense of this in the context of a whole university. Because I don't think any university really wants its social science and humanities to disappear. That really doesn't make any sense. But these things happen by increments and by the stories we tell ourselves. And we actually need to stop making it worse for. I'm not victim blaming, but I think actually we can do some turning around because the stories don't make sense. The bigger picture we know, that's not really going to change, but financially, yeah, the money is already going to a relatively small number of universities. That's happened. We then need to have conversations about how it might be possible to create new collaborations that make it, enable new people to do some research linked to a stronger unit. Those kinds of networking things, I think we need to get much better at. And supporting each other. There's been far too much in this sort of binary world of saying, oh, I'm okay, I've got my research publications, and actually believing that people are not good enough because they haven't, or they're not being included. And we as social scientists, we should be disrupting that a bit more. So it's not a full answer, but it's a start. So that's some of what we can do. But in terms of shouting more about what we do, I don't know about Portugal. It's very difficult. I'm not going to say the UK because I'm going to say England. It's very difficult in England because there have been years of not, decades now of not taking social science research seriously enough. What we need to do is find the pockets in which it is taken very seriously. So, and to talk to people in government, in the civil service. So I happen to know, for example, that the Treasury is really interested in some of the qualitative work we do, but we don't talk about that, and we don't find ways of having conversations with them. In Scotland, because it's a much smaller country and because of the nature of government in Scotland, it's not perfect, but there's much more dialogue. It's probably happening more in Edinburgh than anywhere else because people are lazy and proximity makes a difference, the capital city kind of thing. But I think we need to learn from that example. I think we need to get much better at talking to journalists about our work, and they're very lazy. I mean, they're seriously lazy. No matter how good they are, they want copy. And I think, certainly in the UK, we've been rather nervous of doing that. I think we're getting a bit better. I think that's really important. I think we need to pull together in the way the Academy of Social Sciences in the UK is trying to do, kind of timelines of the kinds of things that have been transformative in social science research. And that might not be exactly the sort of impact that's been looked at in the ref, but actually looking at what's happened in healthcare, in elder care, what happened, in my world, what happened in relation to HIV and AIDS, could not have been managed as well as it was without sociological and anthropological research. And we just need to be putting those things together and getting them into the public domain and not hiding under the table. It's a long, hard slog because we've lost decades of goodwill, really. But the other thing that I said before that I think is really important is that we have conversations with our colleagues in science. So, for example, just to take one example, and there are many, I'm looking at Monica. In the world of food and sustainability, we have to have that conversation. It makes no sense not to. In the world of epigenetics, it's absolutely essential that we're in there. And the geneticists that I speak to want us to be in there. They actually think they can't explain what's going on without a dialogue with social scientists. So, let's grab it. And originality. Blimey. I think there's kind of real contradictions. That thing about originality that I put up, yeah, it's incredibly difficult. Because originality can come in so many sorts of shapes, and it's being reified there. I think one of the things that's happening is that people are playing safe, so they think if their work is risky and really out there, they shouldn't be putting it forward, which is ridiculous because it's going to be read by a group of social scientists who are probably bored to death with reading some of the same old stuff, and might be very excited. And talking to people who've been panel members, that's what I get. So different, unusual, quirky, yes, let's do it. I think that the way that we do originality is not necessarily the way that you mean. I think what we often think we have to do is have a new topic, to be constantly seeking something that nobody's done research on before. It's that classic thing, sometimes people, this has happened to me a lot as a kind of university manager, people come and say, I want to develop a master's program in X, and nobody's doing one, and it was really good if we could have one. And my response is always, well, why is nobody doing one? Might it be that actually nobody wants to do it? And sometimes we're looking at things that maybe not the most important things in the world, just because there's some small thing that's new, instead of saying, well, actually the original thing to do would be to join up some of the work we've done, to take a longer view, to actually say, instead of feeling we've got to go in this direction and this direction, what have we done in family research or whatever over the years, and how can we show shifts and changes and continuities, instead of thinking every research grant's got to be on something different. So it's a different kind of way of being original, if you like, by looking, shifting that figure and looking at things in a new way. Why was it like this then? How is it different now? I just worry that we've got, certainly in the UK, locked into a sort of methodological commonality, and as long as the topic's different, that's enough. Instead of thinking, well, how can we look at this from round the back or at the side, or how can we work with somebody we've never worked with before to look at something differently? I mean, it's quite a general answer, but I think we need to unpack. I think you're right. We need to unpack that notion of originality, because we're not going to discover a new planet. Society and culture are continuous processes, and we intervene in them at particular points. So actually, literally joining those dots is quite an exciting thing to do sometimes.
Thank you. Analia had a quick question as well. Jean-Paul, you had a question as well?
Get round
but just two very brief questions, please.
Thank you. Good to see you. It's not on. I can hear you, but people at the back won't be able to.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think UK social scientists were much more effective than us, sociologists in Portugal, to convince the evaluators that metrics are not good for us. I think that happens also because within social sciences, and as you said, economics or psychology, even other trends of being evaluated, and I think this is very important. We want to be evaluated, but not at the same side. So it's very important that the rector present knows that the UK does not use metrics on sociology, journal metrics to evaluate the things. No, I think it's not your responsibility, but I mean it's the collective. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, so for us it would be very good if that's that thing. Another thing is about, I like very much when you talk about the social impact and of what we do. And I was thinking about if we could establish a kind of criteria to social impact. And that has to do a lot with us, because in Portugal, as you know, most of social scientists said we did a lot of fundamental research, of course, but a lot of public impact research. We can't say that in the last 25 years or 30 years, we helped to build the welfare state that we have. All of us sitting here, we did public public policy, we changed laws, we changed the country in that science, most of the social science. So that image of the kind of social scientist just not mattering at all, with just discussing theory doesn't apply at all with us, even if I think that doing fundamental research is absolutely fundamental, because if you don't do it, you don't apply what you don't discover. So anyway, so just that thing very quickly, thinking a little bit about criteria for social impact and what we could do to be also assessed, because even we have another problem is that we have the language problem. So the impact is also in what you do in your country, considering citizenship and all you can assess.
Thank you. Can I answer? There's quite a lot in there. Do you mind? My brain's
my
a bit
question
shot.
has to do also with Anali's comment.
It's the same kind of comment.
Well, just to ask you a more clear separation or definition between research impact, because it has economic, political impact, and social impact, because sometimes the line is very narrow. So this will be one question or clarification. The other thing is about the grades, the 4-star, the 3-star. So the university wants top researchers only, 4-star researchers or 3-star researchers. But there is quite a danger of exclusion in that process, of course, as you mentioned. And in the following process of evaluation, the 3-stars and 4-stars will be transformed also into 4-stars again. So someone who is a 3-star now might be 1-star in 5 years. Absolutely. Because it narrows the evaluation scale. So the exclusion, it's on the way until you have only 5% of researchers. And to have a 4-star researcher, you need 1-star researcher. Otherwise, you have no comparative base.
That's a very. Can I speak to that first, and I'll come back to this. That's a very interesting point. I think that's a very interesting point. But I think the real issue is that we all go up and down. We don't sit at the same. Well, I don't even like the word level, but the kind of work, the focus of work. If you've got a research project, then some of it is going to pull out some fundamental issues. Some of it is going to be very starry and a really, really amazing journal article that does lots of things. And some of it is going to speak to other things that are already going on that need to be spoken to, but maybe less significant in terms of originality, etc. All of that needs to be done, and we all have a profile, would be what I would say. What was the first thing you said? See, I've got a terrible memory. Oh yes. Sorry. Yeah, I mean, of course, if you make a difference to social care, that has an economic impact. But the problem was when impact was first introduced in our assessment was that what was required, or what was thought to be required, was short-term economic impact, because the expectation was that it was things that could be brought to market, literally. Now that's gone, because it clearly wasn't going to work, because really very little research is like that. I mean, big science doesn't get things to market very, very quickly either, quite reasonably. So yes, there are economic impacts from the things that we do. It's just we need to think about them in social terms. Right. Okay. I'm going to take psychology as an example, because I was going to talk about psychology. As a discipline that has, certainly in the UK and I believe elsewhere in the world, transformed in the last 20 years from a discipline that was actually more like geography. It was a collectivity of parts, of sub-disciplines. It didn't always talk to each other very well, but they kind of got along reasonably happily, to something which is really about 90% neuroscience. And I'm not for a minute saying that there shouldn't be that neuroscience, but what's happened to the rest of psychology? And in the UK, that's a real problem, because psychology departments have been moved mostly into medical schools, in the big universities. And in previous research assessments, because not everybody had to be returned, social psychologists often didn't get returned. And they're, So it'll be interesting to see in our next exercise, when everybody with research in their contract has to be returned, whether social psychologists might be getting grouped with sociology or education or somewhere else, or whether psychology will reform itself as a kind of federal discipline, whether that can happen. So I think those things that happen to disciplines are really interesting. And now, push me again.
The criteria for social impact.
Yes. Yeah. Now, I'm not going to come up with a tidy set of criteria now. I'd be happy to talk to you, work with you about how that might happen. I've been working with a university in the UK about that, but I think the most important things are that we don't expect it to happen quickly, that we actually have reasonable timescales, and we argue for reasonable timescales, but also that we take, so that we look at research that's been done, say, 20 years before, which is what happened in the last REV. You look at research that was done since 1992, so you've got a long period to look at, and that we keep doing that. So if it's introduced in Portugal, say, that you have the opportunity to look back and say, well, this research from the 1990s has now come to fruition in these particular sorts of ways, and that's quite complex. It does take time, and it's been really interesting working with people, actually at the Open University in the UK, on how to develop impact and how to produce impact case studies. And one of the unintended consequences is, of course, you're asking people in the field, you know, health workers, people working in the arts, in heritage, to actually work with you for no pay, for no gain for them, to explain how you're making an impact. And I think we need to have a think about that and about how that co-creation of social impact works. So I think that should be part of the criteria. But the other thing I wanted to say is how crucially important fundamental research is, and theoretical research, because what the worry is, if we're only focusing on what's having an impact now, and that being at the more implied end, and only funding that, who's refreshing the discipline? How are we refreshing the discipline? And we've seen that happen with social science when it's moved into fields like, I have to be a bit careful here, but like health studies or business and management, where there's very little fundamental social science research, and it actually degrades because it isn't being renewed. So I think we have to make that very strong case that there's a story there, that how we think critically and theoretically is going to make a difference to the impact we make. And it's that classic thing. We don't want to just be responding to policy questions that are being presented to us by policymakers. Or we want to actually be framing and shaping those questions. That's what we're for. Thinking, how do we think differently about the big issues of the time, and how do we make the case that these are the right questions to be asking, not just these questions, which will, you know, only deliver limited answers. So that's part of it, but I'm happy to talk more about it in detail.
Just to say that we had a long history of not being assessed by all the work that we did, that we did a lot of impact, but it doesn't count on the criteria.
I think the biggest challenge for us in the UK has been to recognise what impact we've made, and to gather the data. I mean, we're data gathering academics, but we've actually found it really hard to work out how to track those things, or to remember the things that happened. Because at the time, you know, just as an example, I did some work on young women's sexuality back in the late 80s and early 90s, and we wrote a series of little pamphlets, really, that were very accessible. And they were all used by the British Pregnancy Advisory Service for training all of their workers. Now, I know that, but I'd sort of forgotten it. You know, and you think, that's lovely, I'm really glad that happened. And then 20 years later, somebody wants to know about the impact of your research. And it's that kind of thing. We really have to be better at the time, keeping a track and telling people how important it is. From the rooftops.
Thank you, Sue. We have to close the session, but I'd like to... the rector was challenged directly, so maybe he would like to answer.
No, I'm sorry. First, I'm sorry for the delay. I only could listen to half of your presentation.
Okay.
So I'm so sorry.
Very, very nice
Other
to see you
duties.
here anyway.
Thank you. Regarding the impact of social science research, and I think that you should propose things in the universities. You know, we have a very small part of the budget that is divided by different schools in function of the impact of research. I asked for proposals from humanities, social sciences. I'm still waiting for architects and arts. They are not able to propose anything. I think that you must be able to propose how do you measure the impact? I know very well things about citations and number of papers. I'm from electronics. In my discipline, there is a huge difference between different people because some work with industry. The best work I did in my life, I could not publish it. I worked with Siemens and Philips developing the ship that was able to bring the fiber to the home. It was the best thing I ever did. I worked for 5 years on that, 24 hours a day on research. Publications? No. Zero. Okay, we received a lot of money for AST, but...
Commercial in confidence.
Yes.
Yes.
The best guy that works with me, the best, it's not associate, it's assistant professor. The best guy, in my opinion, in what concerns formal research, has less citations than all the others. Why? Because his papers are very difficult to read. Statistics is very hard and less citations. So, and in the same discipline, in electronics, you have guys that got 200, 300. The guys that develop electronics for CERN has thousands of citations.
Sure. Yeah.
The guys that work at business as usual, they got a very few. So this is all very tricky. There is one thing I know. We developed a very hard evaluation system in the School of Engineering for evaluating professors. Let me say, the main goal was to avoid litigation in court. Never, ever, any judge will understand. I think you don't. So it's so hard, the formulas and all that it will be safe for sure. But we understand that all. And in what concerns the budget of schools in the university, I am completely open to proposals because I was listening to innovation. I have a lot to say about it. I come from an area where big innovations will be punished for sure in your career. The guy that was able to measure the velocity of light in the 17th century was almost put in Siberia forever because his boss was very important and he had a completely different explanation for why the moons of Jupiter arrive in the wrong place, in the wrong time. You know the history? It's wonderful. It's a wonderful story for here. And what happened to him? Okay, he went for casino to retire. And 50 years later, he came again from the port of Copenhagen to science. The guy that proposed feedback on amplifiers was almost put in a psychiatric hospital because it was impossible to get so good things. When I teach this to my students, they don't understand because nowadays we can explain clearly what are the advantages, why is that. So innovation is very difficult for your career, for sure. No, I'm joking, I'm pushing, and we must say these things because it's true that many times if you are out of the box, it will be difficult to have a paper accepted, for instance.
Thank you. Maybe we can discuss this in a future seminar, because I think it's
Yes, it's often said that Einstein would never be entered in the ref.
Of course.
Yeah, I mean,
Einstein said himself that he would never got the Nobel Prize. He didn't because of his famous theory of general relativity. It was for something that I will not dare to explain.
It's a much easier thing that we can explain every student of electronics in the first year.
It's complicated.
But the most important thing that the rector said is that, you know, we're not necessarily divided from each other.
Yeah.
These are issues in other disciplines as well.
Okay, well, on this very positive consensus, I'd like to thank you all for participating in this session. Very special thanks to Sue Scott for being with us here today. And thank you, Rector, as well. And would you like to close the session and say a last word?
No, just to thank you very much. I like very much what I heard, and I agree with what you said, mainly. So, and thank you. Excuse me again for the delay. But budget is on the table, and it's my okay. Thank you for coming.
There's some port wine just outside if you would like to have a drink. I think you must all be needing a drink.